Sri Yadirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swami Tapaharine. Today we have a very interesting subject, Swami Vivekananda's message to this IT age. It's a very interesting topic. Swamiji lived and taught long before this IT age emerged. Though science and technology had already started new innovations by the middle of 19th century, and by the time Vivekananda passed away in 1902, there were already many new discoveries, new innovations slowly taking place. But today's age is in many ways radically different from the times in which Vivekananda lived. If you look at the distance we have traveled, the evolution of science and technology during the post-war times, and also the evolution of some of the fundamental social and cultural paradigms that we have witnessed during the post-war age. It's very interesting to note that today we are witnessing an entirely different, a very revolutionary cultural paradigm created by these developments, explosive developments in information technology. So after the Second World War, we witnessed many of these new trends: fanaticism, atheism, agnosticism, then humanisms of different dispensations, direct mysticism, and then universalism, occultism, New Ageism, and nature mysticism. Many of them were actually new incarnations of some of the social trends which were witnessed in 19th century. And now we are witnessing an entirely new era. That is this age of science and technology. And the greatest problem that we are facing today is, for the first time in the history of human civilization, it seems that science and technology, meaning information technology, have conspired to create this grand delusion that we can live a happy life in this world without any of the cultural values which have shaped human civilization right from the early days. This grand delusion that we can live a happy life by the side of a few gadgets which are the results of modern discoveries, especially during the last nearly 40 years in information technology. This delusion that we can live without values, we can forget our heritage, we can disown our own cultural traditions, and we can live a very happy, contented life just by making use of a few gadgets that will help us to travel easily and more comfortably, to communicate much more easily. This grand delusion never existed before the emergence of this age of information technology. Well, we can just imagine at times when, instead of cooking a breakfast in the morning, you take a capsule, a single capsule. And again, instead of lunch, you take another capsule. Because that will, suppose, maybe in the next 20 years, modern science and technology develop the system. If you can just one capsule enough for the whole day, then you don't need to drink water, you don't have you don't need to eat breakfast, lunch and supper. Well, it is possible, it is conceivable, it is not hypothetically an impossibility, judging by the revolutionary trends that we have witnessed during the last 50 years. Now, what life would look like? It will be empty. Instead of looking at a beautiful, wonderful picture of an Aristotle or a Shankaracharya or a Christ or a Buddha, you will be looking at just a skeleton of any of them. How it will be different, let's say. Say, look at the picture of Jesus. The crucified picture is, on the one hand, is very painful to look at. But on the other hand, it is a sublime metaphor for the highest and most sublime, the most humanistic values that we can conceive of. So to Buddha, or any of these great spiritual teachers. Suppose you look at them and you see only a skeleton. How horrible it would be. The same would be our experience if we can just eat a capsule and you feel contented for the rest of the day. Life would be entirely empty of all that makes it livable. So this grand delusion is the most visible threat that information technology has presented before us. I don't say technology itself is responsible, because technology should only be a tool that we use. To use a metaphor used by C.P. Snow long ago, it should not be a crutch that we lean upon, it should be a stick that we wield. So you can wield a stick, but the stick should not become your crutch, then you lean upon it. Without that, you can't exist. So science and technology could be reduced to a clutch and not a stick that we wield. Swami Vivekananda, while talking about the blessings of science and technology, he admired America. In his lectures and his letters that he wrote to the direct disciples in India, you can find many wonderful statements where Swamiji praises the great achievements, the great accomplishments that America had achieved in the 19th century. And he talks about the great Chicago exhibition, the 400th anniversary of Columbus' discovery of America was celebrated in 1893, and there was a great World Parliament of Religion, and Vivekananda came here as a delegate, as a representative of Hinduism, and he gave his great speeches that made him an overnight celebrity in the United States. And after this Parliament of Religion, he wrote many letters to his monastic brothers in India, and also to many of his disciples and admirers, who included some of the kings and maharajas of India. And in those letters, Swamiji praises the great achievements of science and technology, and he says Americans succeeded in making the 5 elements dance to their tunes. I mean, the 5 elements. Nature itself is dancing before them. So that amount of mastery. In fact, that is the beginning of American supremacy in science and technology. In fact, Chicago exhibition was some kind of a showcase, and compared to that, the Paris exhibition that happened later was a very, very poor, a very minor demonstration of the same thing, the same, this achievement of science and technology. So Chicago exhibition was a grand success, and Swamiji he doesn't spare words when he expresses his admiration in superlative language, talking about the achievements of science and technology. And then he makes some interesting remarks. He says, when we make use of science and technology, we should always keep in mind the natural evolution of human intelligence and human intellect and human intellectual resources, from information to knowledge, from knowledge to wisdom, and from wisdom to insight. So these are 4 levels of evolution. From information, information can be anything. Information can be in the form of disconnected bits. It may not be of any practical use, or it could be the source of a lot of practical utility, both ways. When it becomes knowledge, it becomes much better organized, it becomes a useful tool, and when it becomes wisdom, then along with information and knowledge, the person, the student or the scientist or the modern man should be able to know how to make proper use of the powers and the blessings of knowledge, and how to avoid using these blessings for the wrong purpose. So that is called wisdom. The ability to sit back and think of how to make proper use of what we know, and how to avoid making improper use of what we know. And this is called wisdom. And after you get wisdom, you get a higher natural power which goes beyond intellect. It is called insight. The natural tendency to make only proper use of what you know. Now, and Vivekananda in this context, he makes some very interesting remarks, statements. Education is the manifestation of perfection already in man, already in all of us, in man and woman. Education, and similarly religion, is a manifestation of divinity already in man, in all of us. Education should not be just a bundle of ideas running right in our mind or intellect. Education should be one way of imbibing and making use of what we learn for the good of others and also for our own good. In this sense, we can see information technology has made revolutionary changes in the lives of modern people. Internet, then electronic gadgets, the revolutions in communication, in transportation, it have bridged the gap, it have brought about a kind of equality. It has in many ways reduced the system of privileges, and it also has brought some kind of equality. I would tell you something very interesting when you talk about equality, and that is a special reference to the Bay Area. Many of you know a fairly good percentage of information technology specialists in the Bay Area happen to be from India. And that's because just after independence, our first Prime Minister, he started a large number of, not really large, at that time very small number, of IITs, which focused on quality education in science and technology. And now it has, of course, increased very much in number. It has become, there are many IITs in India. The fact that these people come here have two aspects. One, they are coming here to realize their American dream. But Vivekananda would have told them to realize their Indian dream in India. There are two aspects to this. Every Indian IT man who is proud of holding a very big job in the Bay Area should also remember that Swami Vivekananda would have congratulated them, admired them, appreciated them, then patting on his back would have told him, wonderful, fine, now you should also think of realizing your Indian dream in India and not your realization of American dreams in America. So the point is, on the one hand, it has made education easily accessible. I don't know how many of our American friends are aware of this. The amount of money that an average Indian student who gets a M.Tech degree or a B.Tech degree from an elite Indian university or education institution, which qualifies him to come over here and take up a very good job, which may get him $10,000 to begin with, he may be spending maybe less than $1,000 for his whole 7-year-old education. A medical student who comes from India would spend only a very, very small, tiny fraction of the money that he would have to spend here. A very tiny percentage of the money that an American student will have to spend to get a medical degree in America. And then also he becomes a lifelong debtor. Indebted to, you have to spend the rest of his lifetime paying back the loans. Now, education in India, technical education in India has become so simple, so easily achievable, and so really dirt cheap, high quality education. Now the point is, this has brought about a kind of equality in the young generation of Indian IT people, which Gandhi could not have dreamt of achieving. Gandhi tried to eradicate casteism, untouchability and social injustices. What Gandhi perhaps failed to achieve, information technology has achieved, at least among the new generation. I am giving this example, and now if you think of America, if you think of European countries, if you think of Japan, if you think of China, which is a very wonderful example in modern times, the marvel of technology has brought millions of people, hundreds of millions of people from poverty to affluence and self-reliance in China. Japan reached that level of progress long ago. The point is, information technology as being a great blessing, no doubt about it. The impact on education, healthcare, and then globalization, these are all wonderful things that information technology has given us. I am going to point out the other side of the coin. That's why I am emphasizing the positive side, to make you ready to accept the negative side. So these are the great things that information technology has given us. But Vivekananda mentioned again and again, we should be careful, we should be mindful of the impact of science and technology on human mind, human emotions, human feelings, and the reality of human life and human existence, families, societies, and so on. And in that respect, we should remember that information technology could do a lot more damage than perhaps other manifestations of science and technology that preceded the era of information technology. For example, a sense of superficiality, focusing on the present, a very narrow focus, completely ignoring the heritage, the tradition, the culture, and an extreme emphasis on practical utility. So you press a button and you see a screen in front of you. It may be a passage from Aristotle. You read maybe for about 30 seconds and another screen appears. And sometimes when you want to study Aristotle or Socrates or Plato, you have a 20 minutes YouTube program, and the teacher in the YouTube will promise you that you can learn all about Aristotle in 20 minutes. So you are fully contented, you are fully satisfied. After watching this 20 minutes on Aristotle, you have become a scholar on Aristotle. If you want to learn about Plato, there is another 3 paragraph passages, maybe in a Wikipedia or maybe a 20 minutes YouTube program, and then if you have got in front of you a printed book or Republic, you won't turn the pages. You will rather watch this YouTube, and you delude yourself into thinking that now I have become a great master on Plato. Now here what we are actually doing is we are actually reducing, we are actually insulting, we are actually downgrading the great masterminds who have made invaluable contribution, who have played very important roles in the march of human civilization. Because human culture, man's culture and civilization cannot progress just by innovations in science and technology alone. There is another kind of evolution taking place, going through different paradigms. Evolution at the level of human emotions and feelings. When we disown our heritage, when we disinherit ourselves of all that we can really be proud of in our tradition and culture, then what happens? We may have a wonderful home, we may be able to travel thousands of miles in a few hours, you may have everything wonderful, but anxiety, depression, discontentment, and a feeling of total emptiness within. That will be the result. That's why Swami Vivekananda used to stress again and again the need to preserve culture, heritage, values, traditions from our past. If you sit on the branch of a tree and we delude ourselves into thinking that this branch is, that means the tree means this branch, nothing more, then what happens? We fall down and at the end of everything. So that is the real problem posed by information technology. A cult, a religion of superficiality, a blind admiration for everything that is put in very simple, superficial language. And again, a total neglect of humanities, especially language. Actually, the most painful thing that has happened in the age of information technology is that the language and culture have become the major casualties. Nobody bothers about putting a sentence in its full form. If we can put everything together, even the way we are violating the alphabet, the spellings, the pronunciation, all these are terrible things. Well, from one angle, one may argue, what's the use of thinking too much about language? Language is just for communication. Language is a tool. Well, you use a spoon for eating food. That's true. But language is not just a spoon. When we speak a language, when we remove all the finer aspects, the finer elements of language, when we reduce language into its skeleton, what happens, the constant use of that language will also violate our minds. It will corrupt our minds. It will pollute our minds. And it will pollute our emotions and feelings and the way of thinking, the way of looking at life as a whole. So one serious problem in modern times is anything that is superficial is wonderful. Anything that appears to be apparently very good is great in itself. So appearance is all that we are caring for. Everything, you can easily see everything should be wonderful, everything should be simple, that means everything should be superficial. The same way, instead of eating a tasty breakfast in your home with your parents or maybe with your family members, you get up in the morning and take a capsule. That serves the purpose. You are well fed by taking capsule. It is possible, maybe in the next 20, 30 years. But then what happens, meeting the family members, talking to them, and the traditional families, we used to insist on some healthy, useful conversations in the dining hall. All those will be lost. We should remember the greatest philosopher and theologian, at least in my opinion, and in the opinion of many modern Christian thinkers, Meister Eckhart. He delivered most of his sermons in the dining hall, really speaking. Just imagine, suppose every day he had taken a capsule in the morning, and also all the other Dominican monastics had taken a capsule, we would not get this great, grand philosophical system that Eckhart is well known. Actually, Eckhart comes closest to Advaita Vedanta, non-dualistic system of Indian philosophy, traditionally speaking. So these are some of the problems that we are confronting this information technology age. That is superficiality and also a mistaken concept of simplicity. Everything should be simple. Everything should be easily intelligible. I get letters, emails, in fact, from some listeners, Swamiji, you should be more intelligible. So once I wrote back, if I am 100% intelligible, that means you have not received any new idea from me. See, a PhD scholar can read his primary school book, a primary school textbook, and everything will be intelligible. But it doesn't mean education. So what I want to say is, of course, Sri Ramakrishna says, and Shankaracharya also says, Shankaracharya himself was one of the greatest brains the world has ever witnessed. He himself said that God cannot be attained through scholarship. So he himself said that. Sri Ramakrishna emphasized this again and again. All great spiritual teachers, Jesus and Buddha, Vivekananda, all of them have emphasized that intellectual scholarship cannot take you to God, or intellectual scholarship cannot take you to spirituality. That is true. But intellectual scholarship will help you by preventing your mind from going in the opposite direction. That's an important thing to remember. Meister Eckhart himself said the highest idea of God is beyond Trinity. But then, at the same time, he is considered to be one of the most profound thinkers who appeared in Christian mystical tradition. So what I mean to say, in the name of superficiality and ultra-pragmatism, we have a tendency to ignore and neglect all that is sublime and wonderful in philosophy, in humanities, in literature, in history, and so on. Now, I would say a few things about the background of this emergence of the cult of superficiality. Actually, it all begins with John Locke, because according to John Locke, at the time of birth, the child's mind has no content. It is blank, tabula rasa. But it has the potential of awareness. The mind is just like a camera or a computer which is waiting to be programmed. This is John Locke, who is the idea of tabula rasa goes back much earlier. It goes back to Aquinas, and also some other thinkers also, like even Plato and Aristotle also, some statements which could be interpreted as a kind of affirmation of this tabula rasa theory, but most prominently it was John Locke in the 17th century who actually originated this idea, who popularized this idea. And when Vivekananda was studying and going to college and universities, when he was attending the Scottish Church College and later, of course, in Presidency College in Calcutta, he was already studying books written by Western thinkers like John Locke, Hume, James Mill, and then, of course, Immanuel Kant and Hegel, and also many of the works of the pre-Augustinian thinkers and philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, and so on. So it seems that Swami Vivekananda's views on education, which is linked to his views, is hypothetically his views on ITH, because ITH did not exist in those days, but we are just trying to bring Vivekananda to our own times. So in many ways, his emphasis on the need to remember and to cherish the traditional values coming from the ancient masters of both Hellenic and Hebraic and also Indian spiritual traditions. That emphasis has something to do with his own views on tabula rasa theory, which is normally referred to in those days when Vivekananda went to college in Calcutta. So he deliberately doesn't reject John Locke or Aquinas. You should not ever imagine that Aquinas was really an upholder of the tabula rasa theory, though there are many scholars who tell you that Aquinas also in many ways shared this tabula rasa theory. Anyway, whatever it is, Swamiji believed that this journey or evolution, progress or growth of science and technology go through these stages, as I mentioned earlier, that is from information to knowledge, then wisdom, then insight. In this respect, information and knowledge together form one category. Wisdom and insight belong to the later stage of evolution. And he even mentioned that there is a chance, there is a possibility, hypothetically speaking, of a higher evolution. An evolution that goes beyond the biological evolution of Darwin. That is possible if we can harmonize the positive, the more positive elements of science and technology, the fruits and blessings of science and technology, and our own traditional spiritual values. You can imagine, suppose you are an extremely well-trained management expert and you are running a big company and you are a successful businessman. At the same time, when it comes to language, when it comes to culture, when it comes to values, you also cherish a great respect and regard for the traditional teachers, the masters in the Western Hemisphere, coming all the way from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle and so on. From Oriental tradition, the great Indian philosophers, the great Chinese philosophers, the great Japanese philosophers, Buddha, Christ, at the same time Socrates, Plato, Shankaracharya, in modern times Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna, and so on. Suppose you can harmonize and synthesize without any friction in between the best of the modern with the best of the traditional. If you can harmonize and synthesize without any friction between, let's say, you bridge the gap, rather you construct a bridge that fills the gap between modern Western and also ancient Oriental traditions. That would be the best way of education. That will be the best paradigm that we can think of practicing and achieving in modern times. We have to remember many people who are not familiar with Vivekananda's works may not be aware of the fact that Vivekananda was very well educated and very well knowledgeable in all the developments in science and technology and also in philosophical thinking of Western world. that took place in 19th century, even before that. See, he refers to many ideas that could be easily considered to be very modern, very egalitarian, very democratic. And there are many ideas in Vivekananda that could be considered to be assertions of human rights, democratic values, the need for free judiciary, the free legislative. So in many ways, you can find in him a synthesis of what he's talking about. He was very modern. Some of his statements are so revolutionary. I'm using the word revolutionary in an entirely different sense, so you should not mistake. Here, very radical, very democratic, and in a way you can say, pro-welfare state ideas. Let's say for every orthodoxy has a sacred duty to perform, namely to dig its own grave. The earlier it does it, the better for it. The longer it delays it, the worse death it will die. This is Vivekananda. And he's actually talking about, he's coming heavily upon some of the social institutions which supported social injustices in India. Swamiji is writing, this comes in one of his letters to one of his own brother disciples, another monastic disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. He says, every orthodoxy is doomed unless it comes out of its own narrow shell and recognize the realities of modern times for social justice, social equality, economic equality, human rights, women empowerment. And when I use this term, people may imagine I am taking all these terms from modern newspaper reports or modern literature and giving the credit to Vivekananda. But if you read Vivekananda, you find him speaking so vehemently about the need to give women the freedom to choose their own destiny, not only in education, but also in social life. And if you read his letters to Sister Nivedita, in fact, she was a great Irish woman with a strong revolutionary, radical approach to political and social institutions. She became Vivekananda's, perhaps the greatest Western disciple of Swami Vivekananda was a woman from Ireland, born in Dublin, Sister Nivedita, Miss Margaret Noble. And if you read Vivekananda's letters and instructions to Sister Nivedita, you find Swamiji is telling her about the need to empower women to strengthen their position in society so that they can stand on their own feet. This again you have to remember, before the dawn of 20th century, in the last decade of 19th century, Swamiji wrote all this. So you can find so many modern ideas in Vivekananda. Now all these ideas we should preserve. In fact, many of these ideas he may have perhaps for the first time he may have heard of these ideas maybe during his travels in America. Swamiji refers to the ancient Vedic times in India, and he talks about the great women philosophers, Gargi, Maitreyi, Katyayani and so on, who lived in the early Vedic times in India. And Swamiji says the women, some of the freedom of enterprise, the sense of freedom, the sense of enthusiasm, and the sense of self-reliance that he found in American women's society could be maybe the result of, you may imagine, the result of reading the Upanishads, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Swamiji was just, he was telling that modern American society is a grand example of how much how far women can progress in their quest for self-reliance and freedom. Now, some of these values, Western values, let us say, it existed in India in early days, but later it disappeared from Indian society, unfortunately. That Vivekananda actually mentions during his travels in India. So, what happened, the social and economic inequalities, all these can be solved making proper use of science and technology, including information technology. I mentioned already here. What Gandhi could not achieve, it seems, information technology has achieved in the Bay Area. Among Indians, you find there is absolutely no difference. They may be from any of the 24 states in India. They may be speaking any of the 18, 19 entirely different language systems in India. But they're all one. So IT has brought about a kind of equality and unity and oneness. This had happened in America also, in Europe also, everywhere you find. So information technology has made a great contribution towards unifying societies and communities all over the world. One of the blessings of IT. At the same time, it comes at a cost. I mean, everything is reduced to the skeleton. Everything is reduced to some kind of ultra-pragmatic, ultra-utilitarian concept. Everything is judged by what immediate benefit I can get out of this in the nearest future. So that's one problem with information technology, because you look at the computer screen when you read and then it disappears. Maybe their forefathers must have taken a classical work from a library, might have sat on a chair, must have turned a page, read it and thought for some time before turning to the next page. But today you know what happens? It's called manana. I mean, you read it, understand it or hear it and then think over it. Sarvana manana nididhyasana. So manana means thinking deeply, internalizing what you read. That sort of thing is impossible. You can easily imagine, would you like to read, let us say, a great poem on a computer screen? Well, a great poet may be able to do that. That's true. Those who are trained in poetry may be able to do that. But suppose a new student, a fresh student of poetry, if he reads something on computer screen, or if he turns a page on, let us say, Keats or Shelley or maybe Whitman or anybody for that matter. So what happens, very often the extremely short attention span. And that also contributes this cult of brevity, the cult of superficiality. So what Swamiji would have extolled, would have taught this modern age is that along with these great wonderful blessings of information technology, like bringing in an egalitarian democratic spirit, a kind of social, economic and educational equality, easy accessibility, everything becomes accessible to everyone. Anyone can access to any amount of knowledge through these electronic gadgets. Along with these great wonderful things, you should also try to preserve the heritage, the tradition, the values, this unique cultural wealth that is our universal cultural property. That is the cultural inheritance of the entire humanity. So this is what Swami Vivekananda would have mentioned. That's why, in his lectures on education, he refers to some of the interesting episodes from the Upanishad literature. How, for example, in ancient times, students used to go to a Gurukula, teacher's home, stay there and study, read, and then learn everything. And not only what is written in the books, but also things that are not available in the books. For example, how to make use of the knowledge that you are receiving from the teacher in a way that it becomes a blessing to you and blessing to others. You can see the Satyagama Javala story. There are many stories which I am not going to refer to right now. It will be it will be out of focus. So what I mean to say, the biggest problem in modern times is this cult of superficiality, a mistaken concept of simplicity, and then again everything being judged on the basis of short-term goals. What immediate benefit I can get out of this? Not only pragmatism, not only utilitarian concepts of going back to J.S. Mill or Bentham. They would not have dreamt of the information technology. But today it has become much more raw, much more crude. Whatever I get, I must immediately get some tangible benefit, profit out of it. That's why frequently people ask this question. Well, Vedanta, I'm a businessman, and tomorrow I have to meet some customers. I have to do some marketing. How can Vedanta help me to market things better? Vedanta is not meant to help you to market your products. Actually, if you can study Vedanta, or for that matter, Augustine or Aquinas, or Plato or Socrates, without thinking of any practical benefit, then only we are qualified to learn Socrates and Plato. Otherwise, we are not fit to turn the pages of Socrates and Plato. By reading Republic, will I be able to do my marketing business better? Will I be able to make more profit in my business? In Dale Carnegie's book, this Making Friends, and that well-known book, Public Speaking and Making Friends in Business. I remember the story, something very funny. One person was telling, so he was referring to this, and he was praising Dale Carnegie. Because Dale Carnegie says, suppose you want to meet a customer, you want to market your products. So you find out the taste and temperaments of your customer. And suppose he has a great respect for one football player, or soccer player, or cricket, anybody. You find out whether he's interested in cricket, football, tennis, or whatever it is. And you suddenly you get information he is interested in football. Then you try to find out who is his hero. And then you start your conversation praising that hero. Or you turn the conversation around somehow to the subject in which he is naturally interested. Then I ask the question, suppose the other person also read Dale Carnegie, then this trick will not work. So the point is, that has become the iconic metaphor for modern times. Everything we want to reduce to some kind of tangible, visible, immediate, short-term benefit and profit. Actually, we should be able to read the great masters of ancient times in philosophy, in literature, in history, in theology, in music, in mysticism, without ever thinking of any practical benefit that we may likely get. Without thinking that if we can read, then only we will really get a practical benefit. And that practical benefit will get peace of mind. So if you want to really get any benefit, you should forget about benefits. If you want to think of if you want to achieve anything good, then we should forget about achieving anything. Because love for philosophy, love for poetry, love for music, admiration for the great masters who have looked at nature, not the way scientists and botanists looks at it, but the way a poet looks at it. Look at the way, you just imagine this Thoreau who moves from place to place, looking with wonder at trees and mountains and valleys and his own ponds, and he talks about emptying his own melted pork into the Walden waters and all that. All wonderful things you read about. But along with that, you also find a great man. He was not an admirer of modern science and technology. He did not like railroad intruding into his forest and mountains. He was totally opposed to that. No, and he was so happy. Can anyone be more happy than Thoreau walking through these forests and mountains and valleys? And he was very happy. Do you think that the richest and most successful businessman in America today will have 1/10 of the happiness of a Toro, who didn't have so much of money, didn't have a big position, who didn't have so many costly planes and jet planes, private jets and yachts, and nothing of the kind, but is the happiest man wandering through this raw, open nature, admiring, appreciating the beauty, the grandeur, and the mystique of trees and mountains and valleys and rivers and waters. Like that, a person, while working in, maybe he may be CEO of a big IT information technology company, but after that, he should be able to read a Thoreau or Whitman, a Shankaracharya or a Aquinas or Aristotle. Then only he will be able to become a complete human being. Otherwise, this technology-oriented education can turn us into morons, monsters, or machines. There are three options. If we completely disown our heritage, if we disinherit ourselves, we become cultural, spiritual paupers without any bank balance in culture and civilization, spirituality. Then the result is we'll become very efficient monsters, the kind of monsters that you can meet in the Terminator series, or big morons, or madmen, because it affects human brain. Too much of obsession with the gadgets and interpreting our whole human existence as time to be spent on pressing the buttons. If that is what we are going to do, then we will turn out to be morons or monsters. So that's why Swami Vivekananda says his greatest emphasis, this harmonious synthesis of the best of the modern and best of the traditional. Best of civilization, culture, literature, history, philosophy, mysticism, music and so on, and also an ability to make proper use of the blessings of information technology. Otherwise, if we don't try to make proper use of the blessings of information technology, we will end up using them for the destruction of human civilization. Because there is no option. Mind doesn't enter into treaty with itself. Either you turn your mind in the right direction, or it will automatically turn in the wrong direction. Mind or doesn't stand still. It's like pendulum, the clock, one end or other end. So perhaps that is the, hypothetically speaking, we have to remember Vivekananda passed away in 1902. Information technology is a post-war phenomenon. That too after going through so many different paradigms in cultural and civilizational life, like agnosticism, New Ageism, and then different dispensations of mysticism and so on. Today we have reached a stage where everything can be reduced to a press button phenomenon, and people may stop reading Republic the original. They may just, as I mentioned earlier, listen or watch a YouTube program, 20 minutes of Plato, and they will think, I have learned everything about Plato. That would be an insult to Plato. He would have committed suicide if you could ever imagine that after 2000 years of his passing away, somebody will reduce him into 20 minutes visible thing, and somebody speaking in a very superficial language, with great confidence and enthusiasm, very superficial language, 20 minutes on Plato, and he says, I have explained everything of Plato. He would have committed suicide. So in modern times, we should achieve this harmonious synthesis, the best of the traditional and the best of the modern. And this will help us to preserve and protect the best of the modern. Because if we don't spiritually reinforce, spiritually enrich this modern information age with the help of traditional values, then the information age can reduce human civilization to its skeleton. That's an important point, remember? And I think we will have some interaction after this. You are most welcome. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu. Most welcome.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you very much. I scanned the YouTube chat to see if there were questions, and finding none.
Yeah.
I think it takes some fair amount of courage to wade into your talk today with a question, but I'll venture one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is that from the U.S. perspective,
Yeah.
there's long been an inherent mistrust of hierarchies, including intellectuals, clergy, other hierarchies, that the cultural tradition of the U.S. is wholly set up to resist.
Yeah.
And sometimes that becomes so overweening, so overblown, that the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. So my question is, what are the remedies for that? The modern educational curricula seem to reinforce this idea that anything intellectual is suspect.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It could have something to do with the very beginning of America. America began as a revolt against hierarchy. So you cannot easily detach it from American heritage. But we should also remember, and I want to emphasize this point, America, there is another America that we should learn to be proud of. We should learn to appreciate and recognize that the America of Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, and many others who thought differently. That percentage of people who think differently like this could be small given the vast diversity of the population and the enormous size of the country and the enormous size of the resources. That's true. But without some degree of a non-conformity, America would not have progressed to this extent. Any kind of conservatism or conformity to ancient values can be apparently a stumbling block in the expansion of this country. So everything is let loose, so everyone is free to exercise his freedom, but that freedom was exercised only at the external level, moving westward, finding new regions and settling down new places, forgetting where you have come from. So that there is this kind of expansion which would not happen without this ultra non-conformist approach to life. But then when we realize that America has now reached a stage where it can relax and can turn back to its own cultural tradition. It may have come from all over Europe and in modern times all over Asia. There is not one country that is not represented in America. I heard, that's what I read in fact. Not one language that is not spoken in America. So, of course, we are talking about our times. But even up to Vivekananda's times, if you right up to the last decade of 19th century, America had accepted people from all over Europe, from every part of Europe. Now, my point is, now it has reached a point of development, expansion, fully settled. Now it can relax and think, well, there were great masters in Italy, great thinkers in Germany, in Britain, in France, in Spain, in all of these countries, Greece especially, Greece. So now we can enrich America's cultural intellectual landscape by bringing them back alive in our universities and academic institutions, instead of focusing exclusively on short-term technology-related courses and syllabi. So this is something that modern America can very easily do. It has become the powerhouse of science and technology in all areas. Why can't it become the powerhouse of the great human civilizational, cultural, philosophical heritage? After all, Vivekananda came here. When he came, perhaps there was not a single Indian other than him and maybe those who came to attend the Parliament of Religion, the entire city of Chicago. So you can imagine, and he was received. There was something in American spirit that openly receives great things, good things from all over the world. So that should be reinforced. Americans can be reminded of the glorious shades of their own tradition and culture. It's already part of their own heritage. It's not necessarily coming from outside. It is very much a part of their own domestic heritage. So nobody should ever imagine, we don't care, we are American, we are only for science and technology. We don't care for Aristotle, Plato or Socrates. No. Socrates and Plato and Aristotle also can be welcomed in America in modern times. They can be welcomed. Aquinas and Augustine. Again, this hierarchy, you are right, See, in my own, as an impartial, non-baptized student of Christianity, so to speak, I do understand the problem of Catholic Church. But Catholic Church has produced many great men and women, mystics, saints, musicians. It preserved the theological traditions. So that should be accepted. We need not worry about the acquisitions and genocides and all those things. We are not bothered. We are not talking about crusades. We are talking about the great writings, let's say Confessions of City of States of Augustine, Aquinas' great writings on theology, Eckhart. All these great ideas can enrich America. In fact, they can be reincarnated at the academic, intellectual level in American universities. They can be welcomed back. That will only reinforce and spiritually enrich, intellectually enrich and expand American heritage. What we call the Great American Experiment can be extended beyond settling down on American soil, but also it could be extended to the point of welcoming Socrates and Plato and Aristotle to American soil, American universities. What do you say? What's your opinion? You are yourself an academic.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Yes, I would prefer that than just those skeletons you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true. That is happening. So once we recognize a problem, then there is a possibility that problem could one day be remedied. That's the idea behind.
Well, there seems to be an urgency about it. There's a sense of standing on the edge of the cliff in terms of the environment and the engineers and healthcare professionals that I speak with suddenly go white when we speak about the environmental dangers. So the superficiality that's led us to this point has reached a crisis level in terms of the urgency of what we must do now.
See, if anyone has any doubt about America's ability to welcome and appreciate great spiritual ideas, you think of Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda, an unknown monk, dressing with a different dress code, food habits, he was welcomed and appreciated by America and Americans more than any European country which have produced Aquinas, Augustine, Socrates and others. He gave some talks in London, very small little audience. But here, people, they may not have understood what he said, but they could, at the emotional level, they could connect with Vivekananda's ideas and sentiments. That means it's already there as a part of American heritage. That they should be reminded about. That's all. I think that's all that is required.
Thank you, Maharaj. I'm sure the hunger is there.
Yeah.
So it's it's more matter of
Yeah.
Extending the invitation to the feast.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you. Okay, okay, yeah, most welcome. Most welcome.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The birth of America happened, when Washington became the president, and he refused to be a king. So he started almost the democracy of the world, and that is a great experiment. But at the same time, the Native Americans were wiped off to give, to make this experiment successful. So does Vivekananda say anything about this particular contrast?
Yeah. So now Swamiji mentions that in many places. One point I want to mention, the birth of America really began when the Pilgrim Fathers left Europe in search of a new home, and they were looking for liberty and freedom. Now, the freedom that they were seeking, they were not willing to give to the natives who were living here. That's a different aspect. That has something to do with it has something more than anthropology and sociology. So we should remember that quest for freedom, the search for freedom, that was really the genesis of American experiment, really speaking. George Washington was actually a byproduct of that quest for freedom himself. He himself had many slaves. He was a slave owner, really speaking. But at the same time, he was a benevolent person, judging by those standards. And if you look at the different kingdoms and monarchies and political systems in 18th century world, different countries, judging by that standard, George Washington was an extremely refined, a cultured, a very mature, balanced person. But again, when you judge them by today's standards, you may find many things yet to be decided. You're right. I agree with you. So, one point I want to correct you is, America actually began when the Pilgrim Fathers left Europe in Mayflower ship, and when they were members of the Anglican Church, and they but they were worshipping differently. So many of them were persecuted, and then they came here in search of a new land where they can practice their own religion with full freedom. But again, coming here, they found another type of people, strangers staying here, and they were not willing to look upon those people with the same sense of equality with which they were looking upon their own people. That problem is there. You have to remember, in those days, India also was going through a lot of political turmoils. Social injustice was common in India also. And Swamiji himself in the 19th century, he criticized that. So Swamiji was well balanced. So on the one hand, we can judge certain historical events by certain universal values. On the other hand, we should also remember, we should judge them by the standards of those times. That's also important. So if you judge by that, you find that many of these early settlers were very remarkable men and women. But again, it continued to evolve further and further, and this search for egalitarianism, freedom and equality, it actually became a reality at the universal scale only in 20th century, to be very frank. So it became a reality, a real social experience only in 20th century. That's right, that's true. See, Indian Constitution was the first document in Indian history that actually made the same law applicable to every segment of Indian population. You remember that? Indian Constitution was adopted when India became a republic. It was the first official document. Otherwise, in every kingdom, there were rules and regulations. Some of them were extremely sublime. Some of them were not so sympathetic towards the downtrodden classes. So that sort of social injustices took existed in all societies. But judging by those standards, American Constitution itself was a revolutionary, it's a great cultural document. Even Indian Constitution had taken borrowed many ideas from American Constitution, really speaking. So it was a great document, maybe the first one of its kind in the entire history of constitutional history of the world. No constitution has ever reached that level of democratic egalitarian spirit as the first American Constitution. So that's the greatness of this country. That's why Swamiji, knowing all the drawbacks, admired, and he was eager to admire. Swamiji was searching for something good and great in everyone and everywhere, and recognize and appreciate and praise it. That was the greatness of Swamiji. That's why he became so universal. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah. American Constitution is a unique document in the entire history of constitutions, really speaking. It's a unique document in many ways. Okay, thank you. Now we will have, I have some very important announcement for all of you. And the most important announcement is, we will have a summer recess from Monday, that is tomorrow, June 28, until Saturday, September 18, 2021. That means there will be no Sunday lectures from tomorrow onwards. And next Sunday lecture will be on September 19th. The next Sunday lecture will be on September 19th. We will have summer recess. And there will be no Bhagavad Gita classes on Fridays till September 24th, Friday. But one important thing, our Yoga Sutra classes will continue throughout. We will have Yoga Sutra classes on all Sundays, even during the summer recess. And that is every Sunday, 6 p.m. in the evening, we will have Yoga Sutra classes. So please remember to attend the Yoga Sutra classes every Sunday, 6 p.m. in the evening. And then we have some important programs during this period. The first one is our Guru Purnima. It's an online program, Guru Purnima, on July 24th at 10 a.m. It will be an online program. There will be worship, meditation, reading from scriptures, and wonderful spiritual music. On 24th July, Saturday, it will begin at 10 a.m. It's an online program. And then we have another very important program. It's an online retreat on Labor Day. So online retreat, Labor Day retreat on 4th, 5th and 6th of September. September 4th, 5th and 6th, 2021. We will have 3 classes every day morning. That is from 10 to 11:30 a.m. in the morning. There will be a lecture and there will be a question answer. And the topic is an episode from the Vedas, the search for immortality. So that's a subject. An episode from the Vedas, the search for immortality. That will be on 4th, 5th and 6th September from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. There will be one lecture from 10 to 11 and then half an hour Q&A. So please remember, we have Yoga Sutra classes every Sunday, 6 p.m. There will be no interruption. It will continue throughout. And thank you for the questions, all of you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Thank you.
So inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you.